Today we're going to talk about K-Pop Demon Hunters 2, which has now officially been announced, so we know for sure that this sequel is happening. In this video, we're going to discuss what we can expect from the second film, where the story could go, which characters might step more into the spotlight, and what kind of sequel could be waiting for us. If you're also excited for K-Pop Demon Hunters 2 and want more film and series content like this, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Let's get into the details. I think the biggest thing we need to pay attention to in the second film is the possibility that the story could go to a much deeper place. Because the first film was an origin story. It introduced Hunter, X, showed the rules of this world, and got us used to this musical but dark universe. But while doing all of that, it also left a lot of unanswered questions in the background. What is the true scale of the war with the demons? How old is this system? And is the balance of power really as simple as it looks? All of those are incredibly strong question marks for the second film. So I'm expecting the sequel to be not just a bigger adventure, but also a story that opens up a lot more mystery. As for Rumi, I think she will once again be at the center of the film. And honestly, this is where much stronger theories can be built. Because she was the character with the biggest inner conflict in the first film, and after the ending, her story didn't feel finished at all. On the contrary, it felt like it was only just beginning. In the second film, I think Rumi is going to be in a much more difficult psychological place. Because this time, the issue won't just be learning who she is or accepting it. It will be learning how to live with it, carrying the consequences of it, and seeing how that truth changes her. I think the second film could turn Rumi into a much more complex, more fragile, but at the same time stronger character. One of the things I'm most curious about is how much more Mira and Zoey will step forward in the second film. Because the first film gave them a very lovable and strong energy, but the emotional and story weight was mostly on Rumi's side. In the sequel though, I think we really need to see these two characters in much greater depth. Their pasts, why they became the way they are, their fears, their pressures, and their roles inside Hunter, X could all be explored in much more detail. In fact, if the sequel really wants to be a strong one, then the second film needs to turn not just Rumi, but the entire team into individually strong characters. Another big question is what kind of threat we're going to see in the second film. Because the first movie didn't just show a fun battle, it also made it feel like there was a much bigger structure in this universe than we first assumed. So I think it's very possible that in the second film, we won't just get a new villain, but also a much bigger look at the demon side of the world. Maybe we'll see a more powerful figure. Or maybe it will turn out that the conflict we saw in the first film was really only the beginning of a much larger war. And I think that's exactly what makes theories about the second movie so exciting. We don't just have beloved characters, we also have a world that could become much, much bigger. I think the inner conflict Rumi goes through in the second film could become the strongest emotional side of the story. Because what she experienced in the first film was more of a realization and acceptance process. But in the sequel, she will need to really feel the cost and weight of that. So now the question may no longer just be, who is Rumi really? But instead, what is Rumi going to do with this truth? And that takes the character to a much more interesting place. Because she may be forced to confront her own power, her past, and her responsibility to her team all at once. So in the second film, we could see Rumi on a much darker, more complex, and emotionally heavier journey. I think one of the most talked about theories here will be Jinu's side of the story. Because when characters like that leave a strong mark in one film, it naturally becomes a huge question mark in the sequel, whether they are truly gone or not. Personally, I don't think Jinu's effect on the story feels completely finished. That doesn't necessarily have to mean a physical return in the classic sense, but it seems very likely that his influence on Rumi's journey will continue. Maybe as a memory, maybe as a bond left over from the past, or maybe in a much different form as a presence that continues to be felt in the second film. I also think Mira and Zoey need to become much more important in the sequel. Because even though the first film made people love them, it didn't fully open them up yet. If the second film explores their pasts, their place in Hunter, X, and their personal pressures more clearly, then the group dynamic becomes much stronger. Because a good sequel doesn't just bring back beloved characters, it makes them deeper. Things like what lies underneath Mira's more controlled and tough side, or what kind of character structure is hidden behind Zoey's energy, could enrich the story in a serious way. I think the second film has a huge opportunity there. In fact, the second movie could also build a story that tests the bond within the team. A group that stood strong together in the first film being challenged in the sequel not just by an outside threat, but also by inner pressures, would make a lot of sense. They could have disagreements, clash over a certain decision, or the threat this time could force them not only to fight, but also to trust each other. If something like that happens, it wouldn't weaken the friendship theme at all. On the contrary, it would strengthen it even more. Because the best way to understand how strong a team really is when it is under pressure. I think one of the most interesting possibilities in the second film is that the line between humans and demons could become much grayer than it was in the first film. In the first movie, that conflict looked more clear-cut. but the ending already made it feel like things weren't actually that simple. So in the sequel, instead of just a fight the bad guys structure, we could see a story where the system itself is questioned. Maybe some demons are not as one-dimensional as we thought. Or maybe the real problem has more to do with how this war has been going on for years. If the second film goes in that direction, then it won't just be telling a bigger story, but also a more mature one. Another major expectation, I think, is that the sequel will open up the universe much more. Because the first film showed us the atmosphere, energy, and basic rules of this world, but honestly there is still so much we don't know. How old is this Demon Hunter balance? How far back does the history of this war go? Are there other teams like Hunter, X? How does the power structure between these sides really work? All of those are incredibly strong topics the second movie could open up. I expect the sequel not just to grow the character story, but also the mythology of this world. Because when films like this expand their universe in the second installment, they really move to another level. I also don't think the Saja boys' side should be treated like it is fully over. Because in the first film, they weren't just characters who looked like rivals. They were also something that changed the tone of the story, made the threat more interesting, and expanded the music side of the movie. So even if they don't return in exactly the same way in the second film, it feels very likely that the mark they left behind will continue. Maybe their pasts get opened up more, maybe their connection to the demon world is explained much more clearly, or maybe what they represented returns as part of a much larger structure in this universe. I think the sequel could take some of the things the first film only hinted at and make them much more explicit. In terms of tone, I'm also expecting the second film to be a little bigger and a little more intense. I'm not talking about it turning into a super dark movie, because I think one of the reasons this series is so loved is that it can stay colorful, energetic, and sweet. But a sequel still has to take the characters to harder places. The choices they make should have heavier consequences, the threat should feel more serious, and some scenes should carry more emotional weight compared to the first film. If the movie does that, then it won't lose the spirit of the original, but it will also earn its place as a continuation story. I think that's exactly how a good sequel should work. On the action side, the thing I most want to increase is the number of fun action scenes. The opening action scene in the first film was genuinely a blast, because it was not just energetic, it also captured the movie's tone really well. I would really love to see more scenes like that in the sequel. But here it's not just about quantity, creativity matters too. Action scenes that combine with the music, have strong choreography, reflect the characters' personalities, and are genuinely fun to watch, could make the second film much more unforgettable. As for the music, honestly, my expectations are already high, because the first film set the bar really well in that area. I do think the songs will once again be very strong in the sequel, but what I'm really curious about is what kind of musical direction they'll choose this time. We could get bigger stage shows, hear songs in more different styles, and maybe even get tracks that carry the characters' emotional breakdowns much more powerfully. I don't just want the songs to be hits. I want them to genuinely carry the story. The first film succeeded at that, and if the second movie does it on a bigger scale, it could become something very powerful. Another important possibility is that the Korean cultural side could become even stronger in the sequel. The first film was already very successful in this area because it used that aesthetic, the music, and the language in a very natural way. But in the sequel, they could push it even further. We could see many more cultural layers in the music styles, stage designs, and maybe even in the details about this world's history. That would turn the second movie not just into a bigger animated film, but into a sequel that makes its identity feel even stronger. I think one of the most special parts of this series already lies there, and the second film could take that even further. Another thing I'm curious about is what kind of feeling the second film will leave with its ending. Because the first movie had a good ending, but the sequel now has to raise the bar. It's not enough to just show a big battle and end there. The finale needs to be emotionally strong, visually huge, and built in a way that really rises with the music. When the audience walks away, they shouldn't just think, that was a good sequel. They should really feel, yeah, this series just moved up to another level. I think one of the most critical places for the second film will be exactly that final stretch. But alongside all of this, I think the most important thing the second movie has to be careful about is not losing the core that made the first film so lovable. Because sometimes sequels want to become bigger and end up losing their soul. There are more effects, bigger threats, bigger scenes, but the bond between the characters gets weaker and the warm side of the film disappears. I think what K-Pop Demon Hunters 2 needs to do is keep that feel-good energy from the first film and build a bigger story on top of it. In other words, the sequel should grow, but while doing that, it shouldn't lose its sincerity. Honestly, I'm hopeful about the second film, because the first one already gave us a very strong start. And it wasn't just the kind of movie that people talked about when it first came out and then forgot. It turned into a film that people genuinely loved and connected with. That makes the sequel's hand much stronger, because there's already a foundation people care about. Now what needs to happen is not copying that, but adding something new on top of it. And when I look at the theories, the characters, and the doors left open, the second film seems to have more than enough potential to do exactly that. So overall, what I expect from K-Pop Demon Hunters 2 is this: a bigger story, stronger character development, more fun action, once again very powerful music, and story directions that can genuinely surprise us. Rumi's journey could become much more complex, Mira and Zoey could step forward much more, Jinu's influence could continue in different forms, the balance between demons and humans could become much grayer, and this universe could turn out to be far bigger than we thought. If the film balances all of that the right way, then I think it won't just become a successful sequel, it could even surpass the first movie. And honestly, that is exactly what I want to see the most. We'll see together whether K-Pop Demon Hunters 2 can really become the bigger, stronger, and more impressive sequel we're hoping for. Make sure to write in the comments what you most want to see in the second film, which theory makes the most sense to you, and which character you think should step into the spotlight more. If you liked the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. See you in the next video.